I am Izzy and I am very excited to be bringing you a new podcast series from the Aotearoa Circle called The Circle We Keep. So follow along while I talk to public and private leaders about New Zealand's natural capital and future prosperity for the country. Follow along, join, subscribe, send me a carrier pigeon with questions if you have any, and I look forward to seeing you there. Hi and welcome to The Circle We Keep, a new podcast series for the Aotearoa Circle. We have a special guest today who I had to really twist her arm to agree to come and have a conversation with me, which is ironic considering how many conversations we've had. That is Vicki Watson, the Chief Executive of the Aotearoa Circle. So let's bring her in. Enjoy. I want to start by saying how grateful I am that you turned up today. Because there was a moment today where I wasn't sure if you would turn up. Yeah. I know that, I did have to twist your arm a little bit to come and do this with me today, but I am very pleased that you did and that you're here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But what did you think when I said to you, I want you in the first series as one of the conversations that I have?
So the first time or like the 15th time?
Let's start with the first and then...
I guess, given the assets of the circle and the partners, it's sort of like, who else could I get who could sit in this seat? So I did think that immediately. And I also, as you know, never see myself as that. I'm not a sustainability expert. I wasn't brought up like you. It wasn't the same information. So again, I always think who might be more technically expert at delivering, what might need to be said.
What's so interesting to me is I know that about you, and it was exactly that reason that you didn't want to do it that I really wanted to do it. Because the other truth is, I know you referenced that I did have a certain upbringing that was very climate and nature focused, but I'm not a technical expert at all. And I feel out of my comfort zone a lot in the territory that we play in here.
Yeah.
So your reason for not wanting to do it was actually one of my biggest reasons for doing it, because I also think you and I aren't alone.
Yeah.
You might not look at me and think she shouldn't be doing that because she's not a technical expert.
Yeah.
You'd look
I think there'd be a lot of people who question that, girlfriend.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm alone, because when you think of a lot of CEOs or directors, 40, 50, 60s, we didn't study this at university. And when we grew up, it felt like nature was, abundant. We couldn't see it. We didn't hear about it. I don't know whether the science wasn't done yet or whether sort of the obviousness of it all was there. But so therefore it doesn't come naturally, and what doesn't come naturally is sometimes easier to skip over. But I do remember your dad at the, Sir Rob Fenwick, who appointed me, and when he offered me the job, before I kind of went, well, yes, that'd be good, I actually said to him, should we just address the elephant in the room here? And he said, what, that you're not an expert in this? And I went, yeah. And he said, just surround yourself with experts. And so I kind of then got permission to do that. And so over the sort of 6.5, getting close to 7 years, we are so lucky. I have experts in the room all the time. And so I have actually started to use it as a strength. I do, and you probably do know who too, in terms of the consulting firm and facilitator of work streams. And I often start a conversation, or if I'm sitting in a work stream, if I'm sitting in a webinar, I'm sitting in a meeting, and it's all the technical stuff of all of the types of work streams that we do. And I often start the sentence with, as the non-expert in the room, can I just ask why this is happening or how this is not obvious? And she said to me one day, you might see yourself as a non-expert, but you know enough to be dangerous. And I suddenly flipped that into a bit of a strength, and that if everyone in the room knows the same amount and therefore thinks the same, you don't get the curiosity, you don't get those dumb questions, you don't get sort of asking why this hasn't been done before. And so I think that a lot of CEOs or directors who feel this way, maybe the same way as me, it's yes, surround yourself with experts, but it's also just ask those questions, why this is happening and what you can do about it, because not only will you learn enough to be dangerous, but you will you'll progress things.
So on that, you know, when I think about other leaders who are also not technical experts, and in fact, you know, I think many organisations have gone and put a technical expert in a position like a chief sustainability officer or, you know, sustainability manager. And then the leader of the organisation is therefore not a technical expert. I think that can be a scary place to be when some of this stuff is then becoming, you know, a high risk and, you know, critical areas of importance. Luckily, you know, a number of the conversations that have been part of this podcast to date, I've had moments where these CEOs, who I know are not technical experts, have shared vulnerable things with me about things that they're working on or things that they're trying, and I'm so appreciative of them stepping out of that, you know, comfort zone to do something scary and courageous and talk about it. So we're seeing glimmers of leadership moving through that. Tell me a little bit about, your journey of coming through that, or, you know, what you hope more leaders might be doing or thinking about in that journey.
Yeah, and no surprise, I don't think I'll talk about myself. I will talk about, because for me, leaders and leadership is my button. Like, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, and it's certainly what actually attracted me to the role. And I remember having a conversation with Dad, and he said, you know, why do you want the role and what do you see the circle could be? And I said, this is absolutely a leadership organisation. It's not an environmental one. And the difference for me is with a leadership organisation, that's the type of work it's going to take. You know, that's not going to be a win-win. It's going to be where everyone hurts, you know, and how we move forward. And so even also in your question about leaders and leadership, for me, there's a really distinct difference, and in order to answer that question, I sort of have to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, please tell me the difference between.
Well, my view is, like, when I hear you say leaders, I think of positional leaders, of CEOs and directors, and of course they have that positional title. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a leader at the end of it, or a great leader, or, you know, they just have that positional title. And so leadership is actually what we need more of for New Zealand, don't we? Like, it's the work that needs doing, and that can be done from anywhere in the organisation. You know, you look at the leadership that our rangatahi are doing, 25 to 30-year-olds, often, you know, 3rd, 4th, 5th year in organisations. And so, I just want to put it out there that it's not just up to those in those positional titles to move this forward. It's throughout. I do feel, in terms of those CEOs and directors who are feeling discomfort or being uncomfortable in a place of a topic they don't know, I think there are enough people now at the front of the curve, and many of those are CEO partners and partner CEOs and or directors. So they're out there. You're not going to be the first. You know, they're finding the way, they're leading the way. And so I think it's very easy to say, to lean into it and to know what to do, and to go to, whether it's Chapter Zero breakfasts, whether it's IOD conferences, whether it's CEOs ringing up 5 of the CEOs from other organisations, inviting them around and talking about it. So there's such an opportunity to learn. And as we know, there are reports that are every 2 days that are in our inbox. So there's so much information to do to find more, to find out enough. The other kind of key thing about leadership is that I might think this way and you might think that way, but the space in between us is the leadership. It's how we move into that space. And I have to better understand that what you are thinking and why you're thinking that, and you equally need to understand why and what I'm not moving, and that's what's going to move us into the place that we need to go forward. So we can't... I just don't think we should lead it to one person in an organisation who happens to have that positional title to actually change things. There's a lot of others that can do the work.
That actually reminds me also of, one of the problems that Dad was trying to solve. And it's funny how many times we've mentioned Dad when, off camera we were also like, maybe let's not talk about Dad too much in case you and I start tearing up.
I know.
But here we are. But, Dad was so adamant that this was public-private because, he could see each side playing chicken almost, with each other, where I'll wait for the other one to do something and I'll wait until I know what the other side's going to do or, what they need or this, that and the other. And that without everyone just kind of getting their cards on the table and getting in a circle... See what I did there?
I did.
Then we can't move forward together and we can't demonstrate the kind of leadership that we, need to see. So I don't think you were setting me up to kind of think that way. I think that's how you think too. But, what did you think when Dad was like, it's public-private, this is what it's going to look like? What did you think at the time? And then what have you observed in the last 5 years? Because the other thing that we know is true is that this is a very unique model. And I think we take that for granted sometimes. Well, I certainly do. So familiar with what the circle does. But we hear from some overseas friends that this is very unique. And I certainly have heard a lot of envy of how do I get, a circle for the country that I'm in. So tell me a little bit about what you first thought about that public-private partnership, how it would work.
Yeah, I think that came back to almost the job advert, and realising that this was playing at the systems level. And again, that's what I immediately saw. I identified that as that's the leadership, and so that's the organisation. And when I got into it, obviously, actually, sometimes I'm really surprised I'm sitting here because my very first question at my very first interview was, why are you doing this? There are so many organisations out there already. What are you duplicating? What is your point of difference? Where are you going? And so I think, 20 minutes into it was, do you actually want this job or are you trying to get out of it? But I wanted to really dig deep into what was going to be different. And you're right, the public and private, because the private sector had been working as individual organisations either through their CSR budget or own sponsorship, doing individual things, and ministries, again, often working in silos, doing theirs, but nothing had shifted the dial. And that's what drove our co-founders of the Circle to kind of try this and do it differently. And actually, it was just when you drew that circle, I often describe ourselves as this neutral sandpit where everyone comes to play and no one has home advantage. And I think, and again, that's the circle. No one's leading because it's all the same. And I think that's, again, what's been one of the success factors is that we provide a safe environment where people come in and we can look at the major problem that needs addressing. And everyone then actually can co-design and look and take that sort of problem to some kind of solution. But it is kind of special. And I've looked I have looked at times of, I have no idea what I'm doing. Is this going to work? Can we pull this off? I have searched the world to think, what can I copy and steal from? And I can't find it. I can find it in a particular topic or theme, but I can't find it across the whole economy that tries to address it. So
I'm excited knowing there's probably someone on the other side of the world who's looking for this thing, and what they find is what you've built. So you're looking for something for all we know.
Yeah, look, everyone's built it. It's no one person, no way. Not when you've got the guardians, we've got the partners, we've got, and they've stuck in there. You know, like I remember back with COVID and the circle had been devised around 2016, 2017. By the time it launched, it was end of 2018, and I didn't start till May 2019. And, March happened. And 5 days later, we went into lockdown, or 10 days later, we went into lockdown. And April came around, and that was our first year of invoices for partners to sort of pay their contribution, their annual contribution to the circle, came around. And I remember, because, kids had moved back home, in the corner of my bedroom at my desk, and I was going, oh, God, this is it. It's a one-year wonder. But partners leaned in. I mean, and we went into COVID with 25, 26 partners, and we came out with nearly 40, which was amazing. So that also, who has driven the success of the circle, it comes back to the leaders doing leadership and our partners. Yeah.
There's something I wanted to cover a little bit, just hearing you talk about the benefit of the circle being this neutral sandpit and no one's got home advantage. And I think one of the challenges of the circle, and equally in your questions to Dad in that interview around why are we doing this, aren't there plenty, is that traditionally a lot of the organisations in this space have helped individual organisations with their own sustainability challenges, which are critically
so needed.
Yeah. And what the circle does in a long roundabout way, sure, we end up getting to and influencing different behaviours or whatever within an organisation, but that's not the thing.
That's not our starting point.
And I think that can be quite kind of a hard thing for some organisations to initially grasp, because the immediate advantage isn't as clear as the long-term advantage of playing in the sandpit. And, as humans and a society, we find it very hard to weigh up what's the immediate advantage me and my organisation are going to get from doing this versus the long-term benefits. How have you kind of managed that challenge in,
Look, right from the get-go, and it probably helped given a startup. So it was me for 2 years. So when I would have management meetings, it was quite easy to get my decisions passed because, didn't have a lot of people I had to talk it through with. But
how many personalities were coming to that?
What if I did this? What if I did that? In fact, we had a saying in the early days which might mortify people, but... and
by we, do you mean you to you?
No.
Okay, cool.
No. When I was reporting back to the board, and as a startup, doing something that hadn't been done before, in an environment that, again, hadn't been done, and so sometimes I would say, well, not sometimes, I did start saying, and then it sort of caught on. Well, how is this happening and how are you going to do that? And I would say, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go along. And, shock, horror on the faces of the guardians. But then it became, well, yeah, fair enough. We don't know what we don't know, and why don't we try this and see if it works? And if not, we pivot. And I do credit that enabling environment that they gave me. as part of the success, because the culture in the circle is so agile as a result, we have a bit of a joke in the circle team, because we'll start our work stream and this is what we're going to do and this is the problem we're going to solve and this is how we'll go around it. We learn something 2, 3, 4 weeks in and we start to move, and then we learn something out and we start to move. And so if someone hasn't been brought up and we're talking about something, I'll go, oh, no, we've changed this or changed that. And I go, oh, that was just so last week. and it's that acceptance. And they laugh, or they'll, they go, oh, yeah, right. It has been 7 days since I looked at this.
I've heard you say that was so yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does, because when it's really complex work and at that systems level, honestly, it is really hard until you get more information, and then that piece helps direct you to that next piece. And again, that's the amazing thing about the secretariats that we've had on our work streams, and that's from Chapman Tripp to Deloitte, EY, PwC, KPMG, is they will start a work stream, really formal brief, this is what we're going to do, and it just often goes to pieces after about 3 weeks, because again it's pivoted or changed, and they've always extended it, they've always done more, which is the nature of the work, but that's part of the success as well. I think the other thing right from the get-go, setting it up as a leadership organisation and selling it as that, so that's partners, not members. If I join a gym and I pay a fee, and as a member, this is what I get in return. It's a one-sided relationship. But if I am a partner and I pay a contribution towards the kaupapa, then I am also there at the table to help do the work, and that has been a success. That's the business model, because everybody joining us at the table to do the work, we're not paying, they're not on our payroll. So we get a massive amount of expertise that has enabled us to do that. And we've been action-oriented, non-advocacy, from the start. And I think that systems level, again, is sort of where we play, but that, again, has those sort of characteristics, those attributes, is what has set the circle up to be what it is. Yeah.
The partners model is so clever, both by design and also even just in what it's created, because only our partners can actually really do what then needs to get done at the end of the day, and having them not involved in the work would be highly unhelpful. So
all that expertise, I mean, you need that.
Yeah.
And again, as the non-expert in the room, that's who we need around the table. It just wouldn't be possible. But the good thing is that the strategy for the first couple of years was get work done, build the trust, build the relationships, build the credibility and that reputation for making things happen, and then they will come. And so again, those key people in the early days that we put in as co-chairs on leadership groups, those first couple that we'd get, that would create a sense of FOMO.
Totally.
And people would want to work with each other on a really, crunchy problem. And they all did that on top of their day jobs.
Very cool. Now, we've talked about, some of the work and the co-chairs, but we haven't sort of named any, and we're not going to go through all of it, because after 5 years, it's actually you call it the bubble chart, but it's a laundry list of some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
But Sophie's choice, I am going to ask you to pick some of your favourite children, at least from the work that we've done, and, a little bit why you particularly love that. We don't have to say why you don't love some of our other, children.
Yeah.
But, tell me about a couple that have, really stood out to you, and why.
Well, I guess there's the first child, which was the Sustainable Finance Roadmap. And so that was, we're making this up as we go along. We're flying the plane while we're building it. And didn't know what role the circle would play. And so that's all developing at the same time. But I think, when that Sustainable Finance Roadmap landed, and, we'd built in already the work, the first legal opinion, the first piece of work from Chapman Tripp. We had packaged that up around a big Herald supplement.
I remember.
Dad was all part of that as well. And so that was a sort of tangible thing. And then sustainable finance, I sort of invented the way of thinking about progress, so it became Sustainable Finance 2.0, and then that was setting up the board and setting up the centre. And so that was sort of, that gave us a lot of credibility and reputation out there as well. Look, seafood sector was great. They were the first to do the climate scenarios, which again, I was like, what are these and why are they important and how does that happen and will people think that they're useful? And the first meeting of that work stream, when again you try to bring the system around the table, so you've got the, Fisheries NZ, you've got fishing companies, you've got an NGO in the room, we had a bank CEO in the room, Māori iwi, we had science, all there, and you pretty much could have cut the air with a knife because everyone was like, what are these people all doing in the room? What are we doing? But they were inquisitive enough to come in, and it was started, and of course it was really hard because it was teaching people as well as how these climate scenarios could be as useful, as well as trying to get them to impart knowledge and expertise and see the benefit of it. By the time we reached the end of that work stream, they were saying, well, now what? How are we going to work together? And so suddenly that trust was built. They saw the benefit of collaboration, and that then spurred 2.0, 3.0, right through to the implementation group. So that sort of has a special, and then it was sort of rinse and repeat. It was like, could we do this for energy, for tourism, for agriculture, for transport? So that was that set the dominoes off. And of course, the more we did the scenarios and we did the roadmap, it came to the implementation. That to me, and I'm this really painful person when we start something on that very first meeting, the first thing I sort of say is let's drop the organisational hat.
Nice.
Let's think of the problem, and you bring your expert hat to like how we can solve this, and then how that cascades back down into your business will happen. But let's take that approach. But I often always say, okay, I know it's only day one, but I'm thinking about this at the finish line and how we're going to progress things from there. So I just need you to, every time you're thinking about something or doing something, how is that going to be implemented at the end of this? Or what impact is that going to have when you all go home at the end of the day? So it's trying to keep the end in mind, then work back what would have to be true in order to make that happen. So it's always finally, yes, now we're at the action point. This is what's going to happen.
And pretty cool that seafood has ended up in a world first.
Yeah.
Climate, nature and Te Māori scenarios together. And again, I think I kind of took potentially some of the genius in that for granted, because so many of the work that we do is genius as far as I'm concerned. But even hearing, lately, so many conversations about climate scenarios, which are critical and very important, but quite flawed in a country like New Zealand, where we don't have much control over the climate realities. They're very adaptive, versus nature scenarios where we have some more control over how we do or don't respond to natural capital decline and the potential scenarios that we might be facing and the implications that would have on our economy, our society, and whatever else. So very cool, stroke of genius.
The seafood sector climate scenarios were done before the XRB did their standard. So we only did 2 scenarios, and of course they came out. They saw that and then used that
Very cool.
inside their standard to say, actually, we think for consistency, every sector should do their own scenario. So it was almost like the bat phone on the
Awesome.
decks. We would get the call going, can you do tourism? Can you do agri? No one else is doing energy. Can you do it? And it sort of, so it did set that off.
You still haven't learned to say no.
Yeah. Be like, no, we can't do that. Or actually, I remember the board saying to me once about how many work streams are we doing? And like, let's set that, should we do 4 a year? And I remember at one point,
Same.
yeah, getting to the meeting, and it was like, how do I communicate that I've got 11 programs on the go? Because do I just report on 4? Do I do another 4 next time? Again, lucky in how, I don't know, they keep me on the lead, or the freedom or the trust that's there maybe. But yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
crazy.
So let's talk a little bit about natural capital. And, you know, part of why we're even doing this podcast is how do we start to normalise and mainstream and make some of the concepts that we think are impactful more accessible. So in your mind, you know, natural capital 101, natural capital for dummies, if we're not experts, you certainly are very clear on the Circle's mandate to restore natural capital. What do you mean? What does that mean?
Because it's such a long term, likely, you know, process, will I see that true halting, reversing, and natural capital be restored? Because we won't know for a number of years if some of these things, you know, have worked. I remember, you know, we were sitting down with the board and saying, what does success look like? If we can't look at the impact of our work streams and go, well, that means, you know, 100,000 acres over here was planted or regenerate. We can't claim that. We can only, have we made it easier, or have we got more bang for buck, or have we made it so that we can be more effective? So actually, how can we judge the impact of the Circle? And when we looked at, okay, and actually I do remember also having that conversation, you know, back in 2022 about how are we setting up the Circle? Are we setting it so that, because as a startup, you do want to know, am I here setting this up for, you know, 2050 to sing Kumbaya with our partners, or given this is the decade of delivery, are we get in and we do, and by 2030, if things haven't halted and reversed, have we failed and we walk away? And I remember it being an online board meeting, and when I said that, there was this movement, and I said, oh, you all just moved.
Flinched.
Like, what happened there? And the comments were, oh, that feels quite soon, and oh, that's quite brutal, and that's a bit of a blunt finish, and we had that conversation, and we then sort of said, well, actually, it does make sense. 2030 still feels pretty close, and that was 2022 then. What if some extra things needed happening? Let's make it 2035. But when we asked ourselves whether that was the right thing, this would make it feel more urgent. This would ensure that every decision we made was purposeful, and if we only had 50 work streams to do in that time, what would we do? It would prioritise the resources really well. So I do think that having that end time creates that urgency, and because of that, the Circle, as in its current form, might not see natural capital fully restored. I really hope by that stage we have seen it halted, because we're in deep trouble if we don't. But I don't know, in terms of seeing that. But the perhaps how we judge it best is climate and nature still being mentioned as the election campaign, or is it so embedded and so normal, it's off the campaign table? That would be success, wouldn't it? If there's this cross-party support, recognising the importance of natural capital to our economy, if businesses didn't have to justify why they've got these line items in the budgets, that would be success. So I think that's probably where I'd be coming from in terms of recognising the work of the circle, rather than how can I prove that with the science.
So interesting to me that I was like, I want to talk about natural capital. And you were like, no, I don't want to. I want to talk about leadership. And what you ended up sort of saying was, we might not know the impacts that we have in the work that we do. And to me, that is exactly leadership. Management is managing the things that you know and seeing the outcomes of the things that you do. Leadership is setting a vision and the inspiration and the aspiration and getting on and doing it and knowing you probably won't ever see the impacts or the outcomes of the work that you do. So I'm
going to push back there, because I think those are common attributes of leaders, and but I actually think leadership is more about strong values tightly held, and that mindset. And there's a football coach at Stanford University, and he says, culture is about the standards that you hold highest, but also the standards you won't drop below. And I think, when you have a decision to make, if you're a CEO, a director, if you've got a decision or a strategy to decide on, if you're questioning what you're doing, I think if you come back to your values, therein often lies the answer. I've been really fortunate in my career to work with a number of amazing, significant New Zealand leaders, and the likes of Sir Ron Carter, Sir Hugh Kawharo, Sir Paul Callaghan, Sir Stephen Tyndall, work with, learn from Sir John Graham, Sir Wilson Winteray, Sir Rob Fenwick. And when you look at those people, values is what has created, they've all undertaken and still are undertaking leadership, but it's based on those values. There's this 4-star general, Norman Schwarzkopf, from the 90s Gulf War, and he has this list of rules that he sort of lives by, and a couple of them are, when placed in command, take charge, but do what's right. And we all know what that moral, what's ethical, what the correct thing to do is, and so I think if we come back to that, that's the most important thing that we can do. And so those tough, complex issues and challenges, when you look at the CEOs and the directors and the sort of key positional leaders today, they've got multiple things on their agenda, and natural capital's one of them, and it's often the last one, because there's climate, there's AI, there's cybersecurity, there's geopolitical challenges, supply chain disruption, and so I'll get to that. Wait till I fix this, or can I just push that down a little bit? But at the end of the day, we know what's right, we know what's ethical, we know what's correct, and if this is so integral to the success of our economy, how can we leave it off our agenda? Yeah,
I think you make such a good point, even in this with the distinction between leaders and leadership. Being able to fight the urge of the never really instant gratification of an immediate threat.
Yeah.
But leadership is really fighting the urge of some of those, immediate threats to really stick to the values of what you know is right, even if it's going to feel significantly less rewarding. And I do really feel for leaders in our current reality, which is pretty, hectic to say the least. There is a lot to work on and work against, and you've named a number, and I was looking at the World Economic Forum's infographic, risk infographic, in terms of these are the risks that we're going to face in the next 2 years, and these are the risks we're going to face in the next 10, and they're so different. And the risks that we're going to face in the next 2 years sound very, super scary, and very real. And there's, breakdown of, social, cohesion and all that sort of stuff. And then those 10-year risks, for me, real leadership.
Like 5 are green.
Yeah. 4 out of the 5 of the top 5, and they're not climate. They're not just the climate change risks. It's the loss of natural resources, biodiversity, ecosystem services. Yeah, as you've beautifully said, leadership is being able to, really see into the future and sort of know what's right and aim for that. And especially when I think about those 10-year risks and what the Circle's trying to do, nature and natural capital and our natural assets take more than 10 years to, grow, have a growth strategy for. And so while they might seem like a future problem, it's a problem that really does need to be started now. It's a hard one.
I do, and again, this comes back to leadership, doesn't it? Because I was talking about to a partner CEO yesterday, and I said, what if we sat there and it was in 3 CEOs' time, if that's 15 years, 20 years, what is it that they want me to do? And therefore, what is that decision that I would have to make? And that is the hardest thing, because so often in investing in natural capital, it's not immediately. You've got to say, oh, but if I do this, I can't do that. Or I was going to do something this way, or I can't show you an ROI for 15 years. That makes it really hard. But if you've got the mindset and culture in the business to think about 3 CEOs' time and that long-term view, then it becomes much easier. I think about the way that Stephen Adams did this.
Who's that?
Great basketballer.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Have you written
I thought it might have been like a country music singer or something, sort of.
Whatever you say. My music choices. Quite
we were talking about Mastermind yesterday. I don't know what that was. So, okay. But, I know who Steve Adams is.
Good.
Yeah.
If you've taken an Air New Zealand flight.
That's Steve.
Health and safety video. But he wrote this book 6 or 7 years ago, and he's one of the most hard-working basketballers out there. So, like incredible work ethic. And yet he talked so much about how he would have this self-doubt. And he would, stress and panic before games, because he would be, what if I let my teammates down? What if I don't do this or I don't do that? And have I worked hard enough? And how he approached that was he wrote a letter as 12-year-old self, like with all of these self-doubts and things. And then he flipped the piece of paper and he wrote back as the adult. And he said, but I know you've done this, and I know you've worked hard, and you've worked this out, and against this particular team, this is how you perform. So trust yourself. You know enough. Go out there. And I think about that, and he's at one extreme. He's done everything, but I look back and I think, what would 2050 New Zealand Inc. write to 2025 New Zealand Inc. and go, they'd probably say something like, actually, you know enough, you're informed, make the right decision. do it.
What would 2035 Vicki write to 2026 Vicki? Because I'm thinking even when you were telling that story that, Steve feels a lot of pressure from his team, and I know you carry a real sense of responsibility for the work that you and the circle
I think we were going there.
Are trying to achieve. And, I feel that too. So...
Do you remember that?
I do. Do you want to tell me about the leaf, or do you want to tell me what 35 Vicki would write to 2026 Vicki?
That's what gets me out of bed every morning. Oh, God damn you, Izzy. Oh, I didn't think you were going to...
You shouldn't have brought the leaf.
What?
I'm so pleased that you brought the leaf. I actually normally have my leaf in my handbag.
It sits on my desk, so then I can see it. And you might need to explain what this means, because I obviously can't.
When Dad passed away, he wanted a tangi and a funeral that really represented him, and so he was wrapped in a harakiki. He had weavers from Ngāti Whātua weave him a coffin out of flax, out of harakiki. He was wrapped in that. He didn't want rose petals, although he did love roses. So we collected puri leaves from underneath his favourite puri tree on Waiheke, and we had bags of those that people placed on his harakiki coffin when he was leaving the cathedral. And one of his friends is a sculptor, and a couple of days later she had a puri leaf blow up her leg walking down Parnell Rise by the cathedral where the funeral was. And she kept that leaf and she took it home and she cast it, and she gave us a collection of leaves to give to people that we knew would need a memento of Dad. And I guess even in that, we knew that there were people that would need or want to have him nearby, knowing that that is still, true, and he's still on the desk, and he's still, he's still doing that. It doesn't surprise me for you, especially, but it is nice to see him.
Yeah, there's a... it's funny, there's the work that we get involved in, and sometimes, I'm sure many colleagues and different partners feel this, that there are times where it's really overwhelming, and it's, how do you keep going, and what gets you out of bed each day, and I do feel that there's a huge responsibility with that legacy. I think it's also, if you didn't do what you do, and the CSOs across all our partners didn't do what they do, and up against it, or budgets being, cut, and team members going, if we don't continue that work, who will? We don't have a choice. That's not to say I don't get overwhelmed on a regular basis, and I don't get overwhelmed, although it does hit me sometimes, when I hear news or I hear reports or decisions delayed, or that's a certain amount. But also the circle work, because it's at that front of the curve, and we start something, and it's like, oh my God, I don't know if we can pull this off, and look at the people involved and the resources, and oh God, we promised this. That sometimes I walk away from my desk going, I don't know whether we can do this, and I go and have the cup of tea, and I go and take that little bit of break, and I look outside and I see, okay, we've done this before, this is okay, and I come back. And I am also, I think, that person that, it's not glass half full. I'm probably 10% full. I only need a little bit in there, and that will be enough to, like, we've got to keep going. But we don't have that choice.
It's so interesting to hear you say that as well, because, how are we going to do it and how are we going to pull it off? And yet, the latest baby, our natural infrastructure plan, is probably one of the most complicated. So you clearly don't scare easily because you've bitten off, an even bigger, thing to chew on.
The non-expert in the room, I don't know what it involves sometimes. I just see and think, I wonder if that's what we could do, and set wheels in motion. And it's like, actually, this is quite hard. There's going to be a lot of work and innovation here, because this again hasn't been done.
I'm excited about that one.
How do you cope with that overwhelm and that kind of the resilient side too, when a lot is coming at us, ups and downs and all those sorts of things, and what's happened in the last sort of 5.5 years? Do you have a little mechanism or way of getting through things? Yeah,
I do think anyone that works in the space that we work in, and there's a lot of us, we do sacrifice some comfort in learning the realities of what we are facing from an environmental perspective. It would be much easier to not care and not know. That would be a much more relaxing lifestyle. So anyone working in the space, I do think, sacrifices a lot of comfort and peace in knowing this. And so I've definitely had some pretty emotional or low or exhausting or draining experiences, and learning about some of the challenges that we face. I have genuinely found, and I think this comes even in the distinction between hope and optimism, I've genuinely found the more actively involved you are in actually trying to do something about the information that you know is one of the most calming ways of kind of managing the stress or anxiety that might come with the information that we learn doing the kinds of work that we do. Learning something and then not doing anything about it, or sort of sitting in that fear, I think is a really fast way to kind of spiral into a doom space. The more actively involved I've become in doing work, the more the more I've been able to manage some of the stress or anxiety that comes with understanding this kind of thing.
That's amazing. I know one CEO who has moved in the last 6-8 months, and that person, without giving them away, said actually they're really looking forward to walking away and being a naive citizen, because sometimes knowing a lot is really hard.
I so get that.
Yeah.
I so get that. But for me, and again, it's that kind of difference between hope and optimism. I'm not particularly optimistic. Optimism is assuming great things will happen. I have seen lots of demonstrations of us making choices that take us further away from the great things happening, whereas hope is a verb, and that means that you have hope because you are doing things to change that. Yeah. So I've got a lot of hope and a lot of energy, not necessarily a lot of optimism all of the time, but the more hope and energy and action I take in the areas that I can see where I can have influence, genuinely the less anxious I feel about some of the things that we do or don't know. We have covered a huge amount today, gone on a few tangents, which I expected from the two of us, and as also expected, we have talked for a long time. Covered a lot of ground. What is the one thing that you would want someone to take from this conversation? What's the one thing that you hope sort of sticks in their mind? Or, what's the one challenge, or, one thing that you want someone to listen to this and then go away thinking about, or go away and do?
In the UK, is the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, and they have been looking back, going, what did they learn from that? And, you know, they kind of reiterated that after traumatic events, there is a real resilience, but there's also this real desire and innovation to move forward and get things done. And Sir Jonathan Porritt came and updated the board a couple of months ago, and I was probably sitting in quite a stuck place, and he just released it for me, because he said the world has been backsliding on climate and nature, and that has happened before, and we are still coming to the end of that. But now is the time that we have to focus our leadership on what comes after. And any successful infrastructure comes back to site preparation, how well that was set up. So now is the time to innovate, to test pilot, to get systems and processes sorted, to build capability, so that when momentum starts again, we can come out faster and higher.
And we will. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a special thank you to Vicki Watson, our guest. We went on a real roller coaster of a conversation, so I'm giving her an extra thank you for coming along. There are lots of other interesting conversations for you to listen to, so follow along, subscribe, tell a friend, tell your mum, and I will see you on the next one.